Hey everybody, and welcome to another video from Northeast Christian Apologetics. My name's Simon Williams, and tonight you are watching our live stream, which is our Monday night book study, which happens every Monday night at 6 p.m. Today we're going to be studying the book Tactics, which you can see over my head, and as always, just give you information about the book, like I do every week. The book was written by Greg Koukl. He has a ministry called Stand to Reason. You can find him on YouTube, and he also has a website. Highly recommend checking it out. He does great work. And you can purchase this book at Amazon.com as well as ChristianBooks.com. And so I highly recommend getting it because it's a handy book to have with you. I recommend that you have it with you so that you can follow along and make highlights and also reference it on your own. This book is, I think it's very helpful. And it doesn't have to be limited to discussing Christian apologetics. You can use these tactics for any kind of conversation, whether it's like a controversial topic that you have a particular opinion on, or just you're having a conversation with your boss or your kids on certain things. This is helpful in a lot of different ways. So it's a very good book to have on hand to reference and things of that nature. I hope everyone's having a great week. I'm having a great week. I started doing teaching Apologetics 101 at the church in Norwich. It's actually not the church. It's a castle church in Norwich. Did session 1, and we had some small technical difficulties, but we got through it together, and the people there seem to be blessed by it. So be sure to keep Northeast Christian Apologetics in your prayers so that we can help strengthen the faith of God's citizenship as best we can, locally and both online. There's a lot of really good apologetics resources online, though, so I'm trying to do local stuff as well. So about the book, we're on chapter 9 today, and chapter 9 is titled Turnabout, Defending Against Columbo. And so last week we were talking about chapter 8, and where is my, there it is. Chapter 8, which was talking about perfecting the Columbo. And he was giving us ways in which we can perform Columbo better by improving your footwork, how to learn from his mistakes, talking about not using questions and being a little bit too edgy. You don't want to be edgy, you know. So make sure that you're practicing this. Practice makes perfect, you know. Got to get used to doing the Columbo Tactic. And just as a reminder, the Columbo Tactic has 3 stages, but the first one is what do you mean by that? And that is just to get a better idea of what the person that you're talking to actually believes and what he means by a particular claim that he's making or she's making. And then number 2 is why do you believe that way? So first you want to get clarification on what they believe, and then you want to get clarification on why they believe what they believe. Just as a reminder, these tactics are meant to help you in conversations to help other people understand things more clearly. These tactics can be used in inappropriate ways, which we're going to talk about today. And that's not what we're endeavoring to do. As Christians, we are seeking to understand the truth and also to help other people discover the truth. Okay, and these tactics can help you. So those are the first 2 steps. And the step 3, this is where people really can misuse the Columbo Tactic. But step 3 is using questions to help persuade people to a point, or help them to see a flaw in their own reasoning, or help them to understand something that they already know, they just haven't really grasped it perfectly yet. And so you're using questions to get them to understand it. Let's remember that Jesus asked a lot of questions. and so we should also be asking questions. Asking questions is very important, but also remember to be spending some time seeking answers to questions. But don't forget to subscribe. Subscribing helps out the channel. It helps me get this information out to more people. If you want to share the content, that'd be great, or leave me a like. That'd be awesome too. So so why don't we just jump into the book now? So just making sure that everything is all set. All right, so going into chapter 9 of Tactics. So a turnabout defending against Columbo. So in chapter 9, Koukl is going to be talking about how people use the Columbo against you. And that can be unnerving, especially if they're doing it with in a way that's meant to get you off. It's meant to sow confusion instead of clarification. Remember, you want to use Columbo to understand what the person believes, exactly what they believe, understand how they came to believe that, and then you can use questions to help them see confusion in their own worldview. Now remember, we as Christians believe that, and I definitely believe this, I think that Christianity is easily the most robust worldview out there. But in order for you to help other people see the flaws in their worldviews, you really got to understand your own. And it helps to understand their worldview. But the thing about Christianity is that it's a worldview that has such enormous scope that if you spend a lot of time in Christianity, then you will inevitably end up looking into these other worldviews because they're relevant. Okay, so really studying Christianity really helps you to understand reality in its full, and that's what I've come to understand in my own studies. Pick up a good systematic theology. I have like 6, and go to town. It's really really helpful. Making sure that you understand this stuff. But now we're going to learn how to defend against the Columbo Tactic, where people are, instead of using the Columbo Tactic to seek clarification, they are using it to confuse you, to sow doubts, and not in a good way, to sow doubts just for the sake of sowing doubts. And that's something that we as Christians want to avoid. We want to sow doubts for the sake of people learning the truth. We want to sow doubts against false worldviews in order for them to be better equipped to find the truth. But anyway, so, and as a reminder, this is, we're basically reacting to these books, so I'm reading them and giving you my insights. Feel free to comment whenever. There is a delay between when you see me reading and talking to when you see, from when I'm actually talking to when you see me talking, and then there's a delay from when you comment and I see your comments and respond. So don't be discouraged if I don't respond right away. Anyway, all right. So Koukl says the proper use of Columbo depends to a large degree on the goodwill of the person using it. The purpose of our questions is not to confuse, but to clarify the issues in the discussion, to clarify our point, or to clarify some error we think the other person has made. You might discover that you are not the only one who can use questions to navigate tactically in conversations. Others, including those who disagree with you, may know how to do this too, and some are skilled at it. What do you do then when someone else begins to use Columbo against you, especially when you suspect that his motives are not so noble? How do you respond when you think another person's questions are intended to trap, manipulate, or humiliate you? In this chapter, I want to show you how to defend against the different ways Columbo can be used against you. It will also be related. I will also be relating an extended conversation I had with a waitress at a Seattle restaurant, because it's a good example of how the various elements of Columbo come together in a single encounter. Before I speak to the broader issue of defending against Columbo, let me make a clarification. There should be no risk when someone asks us either of the first two Columbo questions. We welcome the opportunity to clarify our views and then give our reasons for what we believe. The danger we need to guard against is the misuse of the third application of Columbo, leading questions meant to make a point against us. The key to protecting yourself from what may be a Columbo ambush is to remind yourself of an important principle I mentioned earlier. You are in complete control of your side of the conversation. You have no obligation to cooperate with anyone trying to set you up with leading questions. Simply refuse to answer them, but do so in a cordial way. Politely respond to unwelcome queries by saying, before we go further, let me say something. My sense is that you want to explain your point by using questions. That confuses me a bit because I'm not sure how I should respond. I think I'd rather you simply state your view directly, then let me chew on it for a moment and see what I think. Would that be all right with you? Notice this is an abbreviated version of the maneuver discussed in Chapter 6 to get you out of the hot seat. Your response forces the other person to change her approach. She can still make her point, but you avoid being trapped in the process. There are other circumstances where Columbo can be used against you that are not so easy to neutralize because the questions are loaded or subtly deceptive. The key, once again, is to remind yourself of who is in control of your side of the conversation. You are. This mentality helps steel you to be firm when you face a verbal bully. In my experience, I've encountered two varieties of this kind of questioning. All right, so just as a reminder, and he's going to be talking about this a little bit, but non-believers and skeptics I've found are very, and I've mentioned this earlier in tactics, but the non-believers and skeptics are very good at asking questions, mainly because that's all they have. You know, they don't really have many answers themselves. Oftentimes, there are skeptics out there with a lot of answers, but most of the time they just have questions, and they haven't bothered to look into the answers for these questions, and they often think that they're sufficient to sow doubt. So bear that in mind. You know, like Christians, and I've mentioned this previously as well, that Christians often feel as if they need to answer questions all the time, and you don't need to do that. You know, you don't need to answer every question, and you don't need to have all the answers. It's okay to say I don't know. So Chopra's challenge. I faced the first version of misleading questions in a national TV debate with a best-selling New Age author Deepak Chopra, who asked me a question you will inevitably be asked. It's one of the most important questions anyone can ask, but it's also one of the most difficult to answer for two reasons. First, the correct answer is a simple yes, is wildly politically incorrect. Second, the simple answer would also be wildly misunderstood by the average person. Dr. Chopra was counting on both working in his favor when he put the question to me like this way. You're saying that people who don't believe just like you are going to hell? Someone once said if you word the question right, you can win any debate. Dr. Chopra's challenge was a classic case in point. A simple yes would have been the correct answer, properly qualified, but would have sent a distorted message, as you'll see in a moment. Further, Chopra's words subtly suggested that I thought hell was the punishment people deserved for disagreeing with me. All right, so I want to make sure that you guys see this part right here, properly qualified. You know, it's this is important. You know, when he's talking about a simple yes, he's talking about like the broad brushstrokes of Christianity, where Jesus is saying that he's the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. You know, so this is a challenge. This is often framed as a challenge to Christian exclusivism, but the way that the question is worded is saying that people need to believe exactly as Koukl believes, or they're going to hell, which is even more exclusive. You know, even it's unreasonably exclusive. And so when we talk about properly qualified, it needs to be understood. So even though later on Koukl is not going to answer with yes That's why, because it's not properly qualified. So obviously, Dr. Chopra's question was not meant to clarify a theological point. Instead, it's the gamemanship of the moment. His challenge was intended to discredit me with the audience. If I had answered directly yes, people who do not believe like me are going to hell, the debate would have been over. Chopra's query would have succeeded in painting me with an ugly stereotype. Viewers would not have heard Jesus offering reprieve and rescue from a judgment they each will face. Instead, they would have heard conceit and condescension from a fundamentalist wishing hell on anyone who didn't see things his way. That's a distortion. That's the distortion, and that's the danger of dealing with a question worded that way. In Chopra's case, I decided to sidestep his challenge rather than try to resolve such a delicate issue with a soundbite. I simply said, no, that's not the point I'm making here. I'm making a different point. Notice the way I took charge of my side of the conversation by politely refusing to walk into Chopra's trap. I did not deny the substance of the question. I deflected it. It simply would not have been productive to try to tease out the nuances of an answer with the limited time we had on TV, especially with Dr. Chopra crouched and ready to spring at any perceived misstep. Instead, I stayed in the driver's seat and using his question as a springboard to make a point that I wanted to make. One that I thought was strategic to my purpose. I had to be alert, though. Questions like Dr. Chopra's are not innocent ones. All right, so yeah, that's a really good example. And you really got to understand the situation that you're in. Oftentimes you're having conversations, and it might be one-on-one, in which it is okay to go into details on certain things, as long as the person is not aggressive and things of that nature. You got to read the person that you're talking to and also the audience. But if you're in a situation in which you're talking to somebody in front of a lot of other people, it may be best to just sidestep those kinds of questions altogether, like Dr. Koukl did here. Greg Koukl did here. Okay. So tactics for atheists. The second variety of deceptive questions you need to be warned about is much more subtle and therefore much more dangerous. The entire book has been written to help atheists rattle you with questions meant to create unwarranted doubt about your convictions. More and more atheists are taking tactical cues from atheist philosopher Peter Boghossian, who has written a book titled A Manual for Creating Atheists. It is essentially a tactics book for atheists, and the purpose of this book is to help other atheists make an atheist out of you. Boghossian calls his approach street epistemology. His strategy is unique, though, since he has no interest in making the case in favor of atheism or against any particular religious claim. It's not necessary. If he can use the question simply to plant a seed of doubt about the legitimacy of your faith, then he's satisfied. This is the same gardening concept I discussed earlier, but now it's being used by an atheist. And I have some experience with a street epistemologist. I'm actually a member on a street epistemologist Discord server, and I take a look around there every now and then to see what they're talking about. And actually, Boghossian recently has distanced himself from the street epistemologist group altogether. For political reasons. It's not that he's against it or anything. It's just that he doesn't want to get it wrapped up in woke ideologies, or what's perceived as wokeness nowadays. But nevertheless, street epistemology is growing in popularity, and so you need to be aware of it. So Boghossian's street epistemologists are dangerous not because they're right, but because they're very clever and they're very nice. They are friendly and non-combative and ask lots and lots of questions challenging your faith, since they're convinced your faith has no basis in fact. Yeah, but they also, a lot of them have a tendency to doubt pretty much any claim. But they often fail to realize that claims are not the only things that require evidence for belief. The claims are not the only things that require justifications. There's also times in which doubts require justifications. Like if for example, if I were to tell my brother that I doubted that my wife existed, it would be really my brother would be like, why? And asking that question, why, is seeking justification. Why do you have doubts about the existence of your wife? Those kinds of things, these kinds of absurdities. There are things in which you have adequate justification for believing, and but street epistemologists will try to challenge you on a lot of these things, so keep that in mind. The questions Boghossian teaches atheists to ask are not meant to clarify, though. They are meant to stupefy. They're often hypotheticals, like what ifs. What if kind of questions that unsuspecting Christians answer without reflection, not realizing they're being ambushed. Boghossian gives a personal example of how he did this in a conversation with a Mormon security guard who appealed to creation as evidence for God, making the argument that if the universe began to exist, then a creator God must exist. So PB is talking about Peter Boghossian. Well, if the universe... Man, I thought that there was a earlier part to that. But, well, if the universe always existed, then it wasn't created. If it wasn't created, what would that mean? Man, isn't there more to this? Oh, well. I could have sworn that he had the person say this, but, Anyway, Boghossian says, well, if the universe always existed, then it wasn't created. If it wasn't created, then what would that mean? And then SG pausing that there's no God. And PB is like, yep, that's what it would mean. Of course, it would mean nothing of the sort. And Boghossian knows that since he's a philosopher. All right, so this is tying back to the Kalam cosmological argument. And what Boghossian is just doing is sowing seeds of doubt regarding whether or not the universe began to exist. And the Kalam cosmological argument, just as a reminder, we talked about it at length when we were reading On Guard, and you can see those videos on YouTube as well. But the Kalam cosmological argument is premise 1: everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. Number 2, the universe began to exist. And number 3, the conclusion, therefore, the universe has a cause for its existence. And then people argue that the cause for God, the universe is beginning to exist, is God. So what he's doing here is just sowing seeds of doubt regarding the second premise of the Kalam. So if and this person is making a misstep here. The Mormon security guard, SG security guard, for some reason he thinks that if the universe was eternal, then that would mean that there is no God, which is not the case. And that's and we actually discussed that situation when we did when we talked about the Leibnizian cosmological argument, which is also in the On Guard series. Definitely recommend checking that out. So Koukl continues, of course it would mean nothing of the sort. The Boghossian knows, and Boghossian knows that since he's a philosopher. The technical... Now, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting, but I don't know Boghossian. I haven't read any of his work, but just because you're a philosopher does not mean that he knows this. There are philosophers out there, such as like Daniel Dennett, who have been in error regarding the Kalam cosmological argument, thinking that it's framed in a way that the first premise says everything that exists has a cause for its existence, But so just because a person's a philosopher doesn't necessarily mean he knows any better. Keep that in mind. The technical error in his argument is called denying the antecedent in a conditional syllogism. But you can readily see for yourself that even if the universe always existed, which almost no one believes anymore because of overwhelming scientific evidence to the contrary, it still wouldn't rule out God. The universe, being contingent and not self-existent, could still depend on a self-existent God for its eternal existence. So, this gets a little complicated here, just because a lot of people think that because something is contingent means that it began to exist, and that's not. And that's not necessarily the case. When we're talking about contingency, oftentimes it's framed in terms of could have been otherwise. So even an internal universe, as long as it's not necessary, it could have been otherwise. Like I could have been wearing a different shirt right now. That means that it could have been otherwise and therefore contingent. Okay. So that's what he's referring to here. So using a clever hypothetical linked in a question, the philosopher had duped the security guard who Boghossian admitted looked horrified and scared. The atheist was elated, though. I tried to hide my joy, show my approval, and acknowledge our success. You see, there's a lot of people out there who are eager for you to fall away from the faith, and for what? What? For nothing. I don't understand. Well, why should we prefer Boghossian's worldview, which in street epistemology is not well formulated, over the worldview that we already have? Just because some questions pop up that he doesn't provide any alternative to? We need plausible alternatives. We need plausible alternatives. That's what we need, not questions. So Boghossian had taken advantage of a Mormon's philosophic and scientific naivety by feeding him a fallacy. He then patted himself on the back, since even though his reasoning was awful, he had accomplished what he set out to do, ravage the Mormon's confidence regardless of the truth. Once again, your best defense with people like this is to politely refuse to play the question game. The moment you feel like the questions might be designed to manipulate you, stop the conversation, ask for clarification before you go any further. Here's how that might look. In brief, Boghossian's encounter with the Mormon. Boghossian. If the universe always existed, then it wasn't created. If it wasn't caused, what would that mean? Security guard, I'm not clear at what you're getting at. What do you think it would mean? Boghossian, that there is no God. The security guard, really? How does that follow? Notice your response here forces the questioner to make his point and defend it instead of his question getting you to make his point for him. Here's another example, this time of a question put to me by a Boghossian disciple. Atheist, if there were no hell, would you still be a Christian? This query seems innocent enough on the surface. Of course, we wouldn't be Christians, strictly speaking, if there were no hell. There would be no need for Christianity if there were no need for hell. It's a trick question, though, cleverly designed to diminish Christianity to a carrots and sticks enterprise by suggesting that believers become Christians merely to get the carrot of heaven and avoid the stick of hell. No threat of the stick, no reason to believe. Faith is reduced to creaturely pleasure or pain, self-interest, and nothing more. But that's not at all what the Christian has in mind with his answer. To be fair, some Christians may believe this way, but those who understand the fullness of God's purpose do not. Clearly, there would only be no hell if there were no sin, which would mean there would be no need for a Savior and thus no need for Christianity proper. Even so, we would still want the kind of friendship with God He intended for us at the first, before the fall, and precipitated the problem that both hell and a Savior, Christianity, were meant to resolve. Here is what the atheist misses. We have not been rescued from something, a pleasant place called heaven. or we have not been rescued for something, a pleasant place called heaven, but for someone. We have been saved for the intimate, personal, loving relationship that God desired to share with us from the beginning, even before there was a need for a place called hell, where justice would be satisfied. The problem with the Christian's innocent response is that, though true as far as it goes, is distorted by the atheist. The Christian means one thing, but the questioner gives it in a different twist, pressing his deceptive point and catching the believer by surprise. The atheist poses a hypothetical, if there were no hell, and the Christian walks into a rhetorical trap. We always got to be aware of twisting. Twisting can happen all over the place, and the most common form of it that we see is when we look at the news. There are news articles in which you can tell that there's what a lot of people call spin or twisting. They're trying to make it true enough to match the facts, but to steer your thinking and beliefs in a particular direction that are false. And we do not want to be like that. Instead, the believer should have requested clarification. Here are a couple of examples of what I have in mind. Atheist: if there's no hell, would you still be a Christian? Christian: I'm confused by your question. Are you asking, would I still trust Christ to die and save me from hell if there were no hell? That makes no sense. Or are you asking, would I still want to be with Christ forever if there were no hell to avoid? What exactly is your point with this question? Or the Christian could say, that is an interesting question that's not occurred to me before, so I'm not going to give you a quick answer. I need to think about it a bit because a hasty answer may give you the wrong impression. What do you think is at stake here? Generally speaking, when an atheist presses you with questions you're not sure how to answer, always ask for clarification. Here's some more examples. Help me out here. What specifically are you getting at with your question? There are probably a number of ways to answer that, depending. What do you have in mind? Of course, any person can be mistaken about what he believes, so could I. I'd have to consider conflicting evidence, though. Where are you headed with these questions? Sure, I'd change my mind if I had no good reasons to believe what I do and good reasons to believe something else. What do you suggest? See, that's a great question. Alternatives. We need viable, plausible alternatives. It's not enough for, and Greg Koukl has said this earlier in the book as well. It's not enough for an alternative to be possible. It must be plausible, and it must be plausible. And it also needs to be more plausible than the worldview or the hypothesis that we currently have. All right, so what evidence would cause me to change my mind? I'm not sure I can tell you in advance. I'd have to consider particular objections. What were you thinking? Yeah, you see, like everyone judges evidences differently, so asking what kind of evidence would change your mind is hard to answer for anyone on any side of the aisle. You just need to be presented with evidences, and some people find them strong and some people find them weak. You asked how I would know if I were delusional. I have no reason to think I'm experiencing delusions, so why would you think I am? And why would you label an inaccurate belief a delusion? You've had inaccurate beliefs, haven't you? Does that make you delusional too? When the atheist offers a response, listen carefully, assess thoughtfully, and answer slowly, if at all. Don't worry if you can't answer all the questions he asks about your faith. As I said, straight epistemologists are clever. They're prepared with particular questions that you may not be able to respond to in a clear way at the moment. No worries. Don't be afraid to say, I'll have to give that some thought. All right? It's okay not to know everything. Oh, and by the way, like they call them some street epistemologists because this word epistemology is the study of knowledge, the study of knowing things. And often knowledge is defined as justified true belief. And what these street epistemologists attack mostly is the justification aspect, and that's the easiest one. And that's the easiest one to attack because nobody really knows what kind of justification is sufficient for knowledge and what kind of justification actually is justification for knowledge. Like, we have a lot of ideas, but it gets complicated, and I recommend to kind of dive into this. It's great to look at the Gettier problems. But Greg Koukl continues, when a question is not a question. Sometimes you will be asked a question that is not a question at all. Instead, it is a challenge in disguise. Consider this comment made to me by UCLA graduate student. What gives you the right to say someone else's religion is wrong? This is the kind of remark that can catch you off guard, leaving you slack-jawed and dumbfounded. There's a reason for your confusion. Even though the statement is worded like a question, you're pretty sure it isn't one. Instead, it's a vague challenge of some sort masquerading as a question. Now what? People ask questions for various reasons. Sometimes they ask a question because they're curious or confused. They want information they think you can provide. Other questions are rhetorical, tossed out simply to stimulate thinking or move the conversation forward. No response from you is necessary, nor is one expected. What gives you the right is different. It's not really a question at all. There's no curiosity involved. Instead, it is a statement disguised as a question, a kind of goal line stand meant to stop you in your tracks. Who are you to say is another example, along with its cousin, who's to say. These challenges can easily put you on the defensive because it's pretty clear they're not requests for information, nor are they harmless probes. The question for the UCLA student was in that category. It wasn't rhetorical, nor was it a mere pursuit of facts. It was a challenge. She was making a point with a question, but what was it? Who are you to say kinds of questions are cheap shots because they don't really communicate anything meaningful. They just stop you in your tracks, like the phrase, that's just your interpretation. They are attempts to silence you, not attempts to appeal to you for clarification or legitimate justification. The best way to navigate in this situation is simply to point out that the question is confusing. Our trusty "what do you mean by that" is perfect here. You might say, I get the impression you think I've made a mistake. Where did I go wrong? This will force the person to rephrase their question as a statement, which is what you want. In my case, I told the UCLA student her question confused me. Did she really want to talk about rights? Did she really want to know what my credentials were or what authority I had to speak on these things? Clearly not. Anyway, I wasn't laying claim to any authority, nor was I promoting my pedigree, academic or otherwise. The only rights I was appealing to were rational rights. I was offering an argument. It stands or falls on its own merits, and not on my authority as the one offering a point of view. Who's to say? Ultimately, the person who has the best reasons is in the best position to say what's true and what's false. This is the way sound thinking has always worked. Anyone disagreeing with this truism will quickly offer his reasons why it's wrong, immediately defeating his point. I wanted the student to think about what she was really saying with her question, then to rephrase it in the form of a statement. The most important thing to remember about these questions is that behind them lurk strong opinions that are vulnerable to challenge if they can be flushed out into the open. That's what I was after. For example, what gives you the right to say someone else's religion is wrong can be restated as, no one is justified in saying one religious view is better than another. Who's to say means no one can ever know the truth about that, or one answer is just as good as another. Who are you to say usually means you're wrong for saying someone else is wrong. This last one is obviously contradictory, but you might not notice that problem if the claim remains hidden behind a question mark. Each of these is a strong assertion, and each is open to challenge, which is my point. Remember, the person who makes a claim bears the burden of proof. The statement question has power only when it's allowed to be played. If you force the implicit claim to surface with your questions with your questions meant to clarify the issue, the objection loses its luster, and you can address the real point lurking in the shadows. You know, like this question. This question is a terrible question. You know, what gives you the right to say someone else's religion is wrong is usually from the point of view that it's like a point of view of religious pluralism. And religious pluralism thinks that religious exclusivism is wrong. You know, like, what gives her the right to say that Christians are wrong? You know, like, how can you say that that we're wrong to believe that Jesus is the only way to get to God? You know, that doesn't make any sense. It's directly contradicts yourself. So, Sheepish in Seattle. Once in a restaurant in Seattle, I got into a chat about religion with the waitress serving my table. My general comments in favor of spirituality were met with an approving nod, but a shadow of disapproval crossed her face when I mentioned that some religious beliefs seemed foolish to me. That's oppressive, she said, not letting people believe what they want to believe. Now, much could be said about this challenge. Notice that she took my judgment of certain religious beliefs as a threat to personal liberty. I ignored that problem, though, and zeroed in on a more fundamental problem, or flaw. Please excuse me for a second. Real quick, my daughter came down and she wanted to show her pretty arm. You gotta point it like this, babe. There you go. Ooh, so pretty. All right, babe. Bye-bye. All right, sorry for the interruption. All right, let's get back. All right, so do you think I'm wrong then? I asked it using a variation of the first Columbo question. At this, she balked, unwilling to commit to the same error she just accused me of making. No, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just trying to understand you, she faltered. I chuckled. It's okay if you think I'm wrong. Really, it doesn't bother me. I just wonder why you don't admit it. Look, if you don't think I'm wrong, then why were you correcting me? And if you do think I'm wrong, then why were you oppressing me? Of course, I didn't think her comment was oppressive, but now I was playing her rules against her. Boxed in, she hesitated for a moment, then changed the subject. All religions are basically the same, after all. It was a parry, a stock retort. I suspect it had worked for her before, and now she was trying it on me. But I noticed something about the comment. She had just made a claim, and it was up to her to support it. It was time for another Columbo question. Religions are basically the same? Really? In what way? I asked. My question had a remarkable effect. I was amazed at the impact those simple words had on her. Her jaw fell slack and her face went blank. She didn't know what to say. She had obviously not thought much about the details of various religions. If she had, she'd have known there are significant differences. And that is true. It has been said that religions are superficially similar and fundamentally different. And that's true. You know, they differ on fundamental aspects of reality, the cause for suffering, and the solution for how to get rid of the suffering that we all would rather avoid. So these are significant differences. Where were we? A significant difference is why the empty claim then if she had no idea of its truth. I suspect she'd gotten away with it before stonewalling Christians who didn't know enough to ask for clarification. Finally, after a long pause, she came up with one similarity. Well, all religions teach you shouldn't kill people, you shouldn't murder. In point of fact, many religions aren't concerned with morality at all. A distinctive of the great monotheistic religions is their concern about ethical conduct, but that's not a standard feature of religion. All religions are not basically the same. Instead of lecturing her about it, though, I used my questions. Consider this, I said. Either Jesus is the Messiah or he isn't, right? She nodded. So far, so good. If he isn't the Messiah, I continued, then the Christians are wrong and the Jews are right. If he is the Messiah, then the Jews are wrong and the Christians are right. So one way or another, somebody's right and somebody's wrong. Under no circumstances can both religions be basically the same, can they? It was a straightforward line of thinking that should have yielded an uncontroversial conclusion, yet she ignored my question, regrouped, then continued. Well, no one can ever know the truth about religion. This is another assertion that should never go unchallenged, so I calmly asked, why do you believe that? Remember, that's step 2, or that's the Columbo Tactic number 2. The turnabout caught her by surprise. She was used to asking this particular question, I suspect, not answering it. It was violating the rules, asking her for a reason for her beliefs. She wasn't prepared for the role change. I waited patiently, not breaking the silence, not letting her off the hook. Finally, she ventured, but the Bible has been changed and translated so many times over the centuries, you just can't trust it. Notice 2 things about this response. First, she had changed the subject once again. The alleged corruption of the Bible had nothing to do with the possibility of knowing religious truth. Even if the Bible vanished from the face of the earth, some knowledge of God could still be possible, at least in principle. Second, her dodge was in the form of another claim, an assertion that it was her job to defend, not my job to refute. How do you know the Bible has been changed? I asked. Have you studied the transmission of ancient documents of the text of the Bible? Once again, the question stalled her. No, I've never studied it, she finally said. This was a remarkable admission, given her confident contention just moments before, but she didn't seem the least bit bothered. I didn't have the heart to say that I might have said... I didn't have the heart to say what I might have said in a case like this. And then you're saying you are reasonably certain about something you know nothing about? I might have added, if you've never studied this, how do you know the Bible has been changed as you say? Instead, I simply told her I had studied the question extensively and the academic results were in. The manuscripts are accurate to nearly 99% precision. The Bible hasn't been changed. And that 99% precision is, it would need some qualification, That's because there's going to be a lot of people talking about, there's hundreds of thousands of textual variants. How could you possibly trust the Bible and things of that nature? While this is where the 99% comes in, where the textual variants, 99% of them are non-consequential. They're like spelling errors that are easily recognized by Koine Greek experts. The New Testament scholars, the textual critics that read these texts, are experts in Koine Greek, and they can read them and know what is meant, even if there is a misspelling. Just like an English reader, like when you're texting people, you can tell when somebody has texted something incorrectly. You correct them and things of that nature. Anyway, she was surprised, really. By this point, the waitress was running out of comebacks, and she had watched her options evaporate one by one and was getting uncomfortable. I feel like you're backing me into a corner, she complained. I wasn't trying to be unkind to her or to bully her intellectually. I had listened to what she said and taken her point seriously. Yet, with each claim she made, I asked fair questions she had no answers for. Apparently, she'd never given any thought to the opinions she held with such confidence, a problem I encounter repeatedly with all sorts of people I talk with. She was dumbfounded by the challenges and felt boxed in. This young lady was like so many I have met. And she knew all the popular slogans, but when fair Columbo questions eliminated foolish options, the truth began closing in on her. This dear person was speechless, not because I was clever, but because I suspect she'd never had to defend her responses before. When she says to Christians, your narrow views are oppressive, or the Bible's been changed so many times, or all religions are basically the same, they retreat in silence. They haven't been taught to simply raise their eyebrows and say, oh, what do you mean by that? Critics rarely are prepared to defend their faith. And it is a faith. So, They have seldom thought through what they believe and have relied more on generalizations and slogans than on careful reflection. To expose their error, take your cue from Lieutenant Columbo. Scratch your head, rub your chin, pause for a moment, then say, "Do you mind if I ask you a question?" Like the Emperor and his imaginary clothes, all it takes is one person to calmly say, "You're naked," and the game is up. That's the power of Columbo. If you remember only one thing from part 1 of this book, remember this. Whenever you get into a tough spot, always ask questions. So what we learned in this chapter. In this chapter, we learned how to defend against the Columbo tactic when someone uses it against us. Remind yourself that you are in control of your side of the conversation. Politely refuse to answer the person's leading questions. Rather, ask him to simply state his point and his reasons for it so you can give the issue some thought. If you think you're being ambushed with a question, slow down and ask for clarification. Find out specifically what he is asking, what he is getting at with his questions. Don't feel obligated to answer queries if you don't know where they're leading. We also learn to be alert for questions that are not really questions at all, but assertions in disguise. Who are you to say? When you encounter this situation, point out the question is confusing. Then ask the person to rephrase it in the form of a statement, or simply ask your first Columbo question. What do you mean by that? We finished with an example of a conversation I had with a waitress to give you an idea of how the different elements of the game plan work together harmoniously in a real-life exchange. All right, we finished part 1 of the book as well as chapter 9, and you know what that means. That means that we get to celebrate. Woo! Yes, we made it to the end. That's right, we celebrate here. Oops. Yes. Mighty Vita says, "Why are you oppressing me?" Great line. Yes, that was a great line. Yes. Why are you oppressing me? Yeah, people often do not realize that their position has contradictions in it. This is why you always need to ask the question. This is why I stress this. You have to ask the question, why should I believe what I believe? Why should I prefer what I believe over an alternative belief? You know, that's and that way you scrutinize your own beliefs. Your own beliefs are under scrutiny. As Christians, we should be endeavoring to prove Christianity false. Now, I know that sounds weird, but Christianity ought to be treated as true until it's proven to be false. Okay? And so when you're trying to prove Christianity false, that way you put it under scrutiny. You're actually endeavoring to be like, so are the New Testament documents reliable? Reliable in what way? Are we deriving our knowledge from eyewitness accounts, or are they completely made up? Are they legendary? Does God exist? What reasons do I have for believing that God exists? Is specified complexity sufficient for determining if God exists or if there's a designer? You know, things of that nature. You know, we shouldn't be treating it's a mistake. It's a huge mistake to treat Christianity as false and try to prove it true. That's not how science works, even, you know, as I've said in previous videos. So that's how you do things, especially with things at stake here. You know, like Christianity, you know, and everyone gets all uppity about Pascal's wager and all this stuff, but Pascal's wager is right. You know, Blaise Pascal was a genius. He was a polymath. He's not somebody that we should just be waving away. His opinions on things should give us consideration. And when he says that there is a significant threat that everyone participates in the wager, he's 100% right. The wager is unavoidable. And so we need to take that into consideration. We need to take epistemic evidences into consideration, as well as pragmatic justifications. So, and I already talked about what epistemic means earlier, but yeah. Anyway, let's go back to the face only. Anyway, thanks for coming out tonight, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed the book. I hope that you liked the chapter tonight. I hope that you liked my my daughter stopping in for a little bit there. She was showing me her art that she did on her arm. It's covered in jewels right now. It almost looks like henna, or I think that's how it's pronounced. But yeah. Thank you for coming out. Remember, this book study happens every Monday night at 6 p.m. And I hope to see you again next week. I hope you have a great week and that you are provided with opportunities to practice the Columbo Tactic. Remember asking questions like, what do you mean by that? And why do you believe that way? Ask for reasons, ask for clarity, and study and know what you believe. And get out there and help your brothers and sisters know what they believe as well. That's what I'm trying to do in my local setting as well, and if you are in the New London County, Connecticut area, hit me up and we can work together on getting Christian apologetics on the local scene so that we can strengthen the faith of our brothers and sisters in Christ. All right. Anyway, have a great night, everyone. God bless.
Hey, before you go, I hope you enjoyed today's enlightening discussion during our Christian Apologetics book study. It's always a blessing to come together to explore our faith and grow in our understanding. Your participation means the world to me, and I'm grateful for your continued support of Northeast Christian Apologetics. Remember, you can stay connected with me and access valuable resources by visiting my website at nechristianapologetics.com. There you'll find a wealth of articles, videos, and recommended reading material to deepen your knowledge of Christian apologetics. If you're as passionate as I am about equipping believers to defend their faith and engage in meaningful conversations, you can also support this ministry in various ways. One way to support this work is through patreon.com. By becoming a patron, you'll have access to exclusive content, early access to our discussions, and a chance to connect with like-minded individuals who share your passion for Christian apologetics. If Patreon is not your style, some people prefer to give me a one-time tip. And if you'd like to do that, then feel free to do so through Venmo or Cash App. But of course, there are many ways to support me. By praying for this ministry, sharing the content on social media, or simply spreading the word about what I do. Every bit of support goes a long way in helping me fulfill my mission. Once again, thank you for joining me today. Your presence and engagement enrich these discussions, and together, we're on a journey to strengthen our faith and share the good news with others. Stay tuned for more exciting book studies, thought-provoking discussions, and opportunities to grow your Christian apologetics journey. I look forward to seeing you again.